read quite a few of these slides in the full sense. So let me start now. And before that, I say we worked on corporations recently. I'm leading a group in Helsinki, funded by the Academy of Finland, on social corporations, or the philosophy of social corporations. So this is kind of product of that project, and I'll soon explain what I mean by social corporations. I have a special meaning for that term in my work. So, but okay. So now I'll go ahead and read. In this presentation, I discuss societal and communal corporations and call them social corporations. They are public organizations owned either by a state or other public community, and they provide services through their activities, at least to their host groups, so to speak, those who take care of them. Such a corporation is a non-profit or approximately non-profit organization, in that it does not strive for profits going beyond those covering what maintaining its services cost to its members. I argue that such a corporation, for instance, school, hospital, or mail service made into corporations, ideally functions as a kind of extended social institution. Such an extended institution, social organization, depends on basic institutions like language, money, and property, and provides services by their host group. It could be us, the host group would be us, so to speak, for their target group, which also could be us, so or something else. Social corporations serve the members of their host groups for free, or at least for reasonable prices. So they social corporations, in my sense, will be distinct, will have the form of a corporation comparable to a business corporation. But it's not a business one. It does not aim to maximize its profit and so on. So there are some other features too which don't hold for social corporations. So my idea of a social corporation, I haven't seen it in the literature. So but many times social organizations are called institutions, but they could also be, as in my present paper, could be corporations, have the structure of a corporation, except for not being created for merely for making profit, or at all for that purpose. My main thesis in this paper is that such non-profit or approximately non-profit social corporations function as social institutions in an extended sense. This sense assumes that there is a structured social community of people, the members of which collectively accept that their community, the corporation's host group that is, will provide certain services, typically for its members, through the satisfaction of relevant institutional goals and organized normative means and communal activities by the members functioning in specific positional roles, and thus having a certain social status function about the Searlean sense. Here I'm referring to John Searle's book 2010 book, whatever it's called, I forgot its name. Making the Social World, yes, okay. It's an Oxford University Press book. So this my paper on the whole relies on some Searlean ideas like the social statuses and things like that. You will notice later. Okay, let me go ahead. Corporate management in a business corporation generally includes a board of directors elected by the shareholders, the managers, and the shareholders. The typical features of such standard corporations include legal corporate personhood, limited liability, transferable shares, and positions or roles for the members, but generally so that a change of shareholders and members will be possible without destroying the identity of the corporation. So, a social corporation, for instance, a school, university, or hospital, to an extent mimics a business corporation, but its host group, state or local community, typically possesses the majority of the shares. And here I'm speaking mainly of Nordic social corporations. So I don't know about China, I don't know about African countries, and so on. While a standard business corporation aims at maximizing its and the shareholders' profit, the same is not true of a social corporation in the present sense. So it's really, social corporation is something made by us, for us, that's my slogan. Whereas business corporations are not in general that. Apple is not made, in some sense made for us perhaps, but not directly by us, at least. Okay, let me go ahead. Slide number 5. Social institutions and facts based on them conceptually pertain to the members and employees, social groups, for instance communities, states, and are thus necessarily group phenomena as are corporations. Corporations are not mere legal persons, if they are legal persons at all, but in many countries they are treated as legal persons, but they are still groups, and that's the important thing. They are social entities in that sense. Social institutions are typically created and maintained by our group for us, so that holds for social institutions. My account of well-functioning institutions is based on we thinking and we acting in the we mode, as I say. A central element here is collective acceptance, contrary to what some people, like Wal is not yet here, so he might want to dispute this thesis and has disputed it elsewhere. So collective acceptance is central. Collective acceptance as attitude or as action that involves performative conceptual construction through constitutive rules that typically create and define social practices, for instance those that constitute a traffic system or something like whatever you have in mind. In contrast, regulative rules tell us how to act in this situation. For instance, how to behave in order to be able to correctly cross a street. So that's what's regulated by regulative rules, and only partly by there's the underlying constitutive rules, which generates the whole thing actually. In we can say, but constitutive rules are different from regulative rules, even if some people, some theoreticians have claimed the contrary. So I don't accept. I have argued that the proofs that have been given for constitutive rules being reducible to reducible to regulative rules. Those arguments are not tenable. So constitutive rules are needed. They have a role, specific role, and I've just said part of what that role is. So, so let me go on to slide number 6. In Searle's 2010 theory, in the mentioned book, Theory of Human Social Institutions, in his theory, social institutions are systems that enable the creation and maintenance of status functions. All institutional facts being status functions in his account. For instance, to be a priest is a status function, or to be a professor a status function, and so on. And status functions create deontic powers, and my voice is getting worse and worse. Deontic powers, that is, rights, duties, and other reason-giving factors that give the target people, this is Searle's term, desire-independent reasons to act. That is, reasons independent of relevant antecedently had desires. You can study Searle's work on this notion. I will not here spend time on it. Okay, so my system actually makes use of these kind of notions. So my system has strong Searlean content, as it were, but it has also other content, and it is my own creation. Okay. I argue that properly functioning social institutions, to move on to social institutions properly, should be based on full-blown we thinking. That is, we thinking in the we mode. I've elsewhere given criteria for we mode. What a we mode is, and I don't have time here to go into that, but if somebody wants to ask about it, I can make some comments later on. Okay, it depends on social institution depends not only on the we mode, basically, ideally, of course it's a contingent question whether all social institutions involve that, but I'm saying that all well-functioning institutions, at least, are supposed to be based on the we mode, we thinking. And then the second important idea that has already been mentioned is collective acceptance of a fact or property as institutional. I've elsewhere in my books argued for this thesis. Moreover, the creation of institutions typically requires rethinking in which group members together create an institution for them. Could happen by declaration, as Searle claims, or just by ordinary agreement making and by collectively accepting the so created institution. So we can just agree that we have this kind of institution where people have some roles and things, and maybe a hierarchical roles, and so, and we collectively accept what we have created. Collective acceptance can be explicit or implicit. So it's not needed that we are very explicit about the creation of the institution when we collectively accept it. So collective acceptance can be an implicit notion as well. And the important is how it functions, that it can leads to action, behavior, which is of the right kind, namely the kind that fulfills the basic rules of the institution and so on and so forth. The performative element here can typically be expressed as follows for the old-time squirrel pelt case in Finland. We, qua group members, hereby take squirrel pelt to be money in our group. So the squirrel pelt is money, and this resembles what kuna was in older Croatia. Kuna is a similar, and I don't know exactly, but it looks like a little bit like a squirrel. Seen pictures of it, but I'm not. That's not my field. Accordingly, to continue my story on squirrel pelt, accordingly squirrel pelt then has been made money, and if the members act accordingly, squirrel pelt will functionally be money in the group. So that was that. So I go ahead to slide number 8. Social institutions, such as basic institutions of money, marriage, and private property, in my account, consist of a norm system, including constitutive and regulative norms, as well as social practices, which are conducive to the satisfaction of these norms and relevant institutional goals. So institutions can have goals, normally have goals, and which are meant to be satisfied, of course, achieved, whatever term you want to use here. Constitutive norms, which I already mentioned earlier above, for instance, X counts as Y in context C, that's a Searlean formulation. That's just one way to formulate them. They say what the social item under question is, so to speak, being at least partly a defining feature of it, and of what special institutional status or institutional role it has. For instance, that squirrel pelt is money, counts as money, but counts can be used colloquially, so that squirrel pelt is money. As it was in Finland in about 900 BC, AD, I mean, and thus has the status of money for the members of the collective. They are supposed to think of it in that way. If they don't, that's a different problem. But, so that's, I'm only saying that unless they do it, they can't use it properly for activities like buying or selling or exchanging things. In contrast, regulative norms say how the entity X, here squirrel pelt, I'm referring to the X counts as Y, the earlier formula here, how the entity X, for instance squirrel pelt, with its new status Y, that is here in this case money, concretely functions, should or may function. For instance, that squirrel pelt may be used for buying goods and so on, buying and selling goods, and as I already said. So that was that. Also extended social institutions, that is organizations like schools, may involve constitutive and regulative norms. Both of them are possible. Okay. Slide number 9. Institutional norms thus include constitutive norms on which the relevant social practices typically depend. In general, constitutive rules are a kind of definitions of relevant social items, and in that sense, group constitutive. New social reality may be created by constitutive norms, for instance, a fact or object Y, as in this earlier formula, through relevant group members simply declaring that something such as squirrel pelt is money, assuming the presence of collective acceptance, implicit or explicit collective acceptance, that must be there. It's otherwise it doesn't function. Constitutive rules may, but need not in my account, have the well-known Searlean form X counts as Y in C. But constitutive rules can have another kind of form. Let's define something like that as follows, and that could give a conceptually valid, or valid in that context, valid statement, which is a constitutive rule and has to be given and should be given a normative interpretation when it's made into use. Okay, now I have a slight comment on something which is worth making, but I should expand on this comment. But okay, let me read it anyhow. To comment on my view of social institutions in general, they belong to the social reality as its central elements. In my account, they are not based on mere sequences of relevant individual actions leading to suitable equilibria, as some game theoreticians, for instance, Schotter in his early book from 1981, earlier claimed, but require for their understanding broader conceptual elements such as the social statuses and deontic powers of the participating persons. So I mean to say that we need this broader structure of conceptual elements, precisely these social statuses and deontic powers, in my view, which is a Searlean view actually, to make institutions work properly. They are not just mere sequences of actions, individual actions that somehow form a sequence of action that leads into an equilibrium, which is the Schotter's requirement, for instance. So that's too poor of you. Of course it may be, you do some work, but that's not the full story, and that's my claim here. It's not the full story. And we as philosophers should be able to say a little more. Okay, to say a bit more about social institutions, they typically have as their purpose to create order in the community by solving coordination problems and collective action dilemmas. You probably know what collective action dilemmas are, so as well as establishing equilibria, which would be the solution of a collective action dilemma, so high-low, prisoner dilemma, etc. You know, institution solutions to social dilemmas are typically expected to be beneficial for the host group, for instance, us in question. I'm about to lose my voice. It was very cold in our hotel room last night, and I was freezing, and so here's the result, it seems. Okay. Social institutions not only enable new kinds of activities to come about, think of the examination rights that a new professor acquires, but they may also economize reasoning by making it more routine and computationally less demanding. Routine behaviors and practices that are coordinated towards reaching action equilibria will be institutionalized and codified under suitable conditions, which I will not here explicitly spell out. Such institutionalization based on collective acceptance makes existing social practices norm-governed and gives them a special institutional status. I will not go more on to this notion of institutional status. I have clarified the matter in my books, so if you want to know, there are three kinds of it and so on. So there is not time here to go into that matter. Okay, go ahead. I'm going ahead. As seen, social institutions and institutional facts in general depend for their existence and functionality on collectively accepted constitutive and regulative rules, norms, as I have indicated many times already in this paper here, as well as status functions and the entailed deontic powers, and on social practices satisfying the rules in question. At least in the creation phase of an institution, such collective acceptance arguably ought to be we-mode acceptance, that is, expressible by we collectively, hereby we collectively accept item Y for our group. Y as something. Skyllpelter's money, for instance, or things like that. You can study my social ontology book, there I have clarified this, and in a couple of earlier books too, but my social ontology book is the best thing to read if you just want to have learn about my view in sufficient detail. Okay. The collective acceptance in question is that contains the idea that the members must accept this matter in part by their actual intentional use of Skyllpelter's money, which also collectively serves to reproduce the institution in question. So it keeps the institution going in that sense. Thus the group's money is created in epistemically objective terms by the acceptance of Skyllpelter as money. Okay, to go ahead to number 13. As is known, institutions in general constrain people's behavior, but they may also enable them to act in new ways, as I already said in one of the previous slides. Act in new ways through giving relevant role-holding members or employees the institutional power to act in ways that in some cases are not possible without institutions and specific institutional statuses or roles. When they are possible without them, I can't here go into in more detail. Institutions tend to facilitate, economize, and routinize activities, and thinking about those activities, and institutions therefore create order by providing individuals with group-based reasons and derived individual reasons for the members to take part in the group's activities. So that was a partial summary of an institution's functions. I think I have something more to say about it later on. Now to go to where am I now? Maybe I'm 15 now, actually, so I'll read number 15. It just continues.
Nummer 14 glömde du bort.
What?
Nummer 14 glömde du bort.
I actually said that.
Okay.
Content. So, on conceptual grounds, a we-mode group, a group based on we thinking and the we-mode, normally ought to satisfy, and in typical cases also maintain, its ethos, that is, its constitutive values, goals, beliefs, norms, and practices, etc., and which I've clarified this in The Philosophy of Sociality, a book that I wrote before that social ontology book, but I summarized my things, my main ideas in that social ontology book. The group can satisfy and promote its ethos only through its members' appropriate ethos-respecting and normatively ethos-guided activities. The ethos of the group can be regarded as the central part of the culture, so to speak, of the institution hosting group. It's quite common to speak of an institution's culture, but here you have him saying something about that. Suppose a WeMo group has conferred a special institutional status and accompanying function to an item, for instance, Quillbelt in medieval Finland or Kunapelt in Croatia. By its WeMode collective acceptance of a constitutive group norm, for instance, the norm, it ought to be the case that in the collective that Quillbelt counts as money there in that group. Our group, as the members call it. Or briefly, Quillbelt is money in it. Okay, normatively understood. Whereby Quillbelt is constituted as money. Well, this is actually a repetition of what I already have said, but I said it in somewhat different words now. Okay, the institutional status, I said a few words about that. It can be symbolic, social, or normative, but I will not here go into the details here. In the first paragraph, I just mentioned the different kinds of institutional status that can come about by this method. Now I'm going ahead. Importantly, a social status need not centrally depend on the physical features of its bearer. It is not reducible to purely physical properties. This is actually something that Searle has emphasized in his books, especially in his 1995 book, whatever, I've forgotten what it's called, but the social structure of the world or something, something like that. So consider a territorial border, a deontic entity, created by a line of stones marking a border. This is Searle's example. That Quillbelt counts as money in the group may be, well, that was the example that I used to illustrate that Searlean idea. That Quillbelt counts as money in the group may be a constitutive, ought to be group level norm that entails appropriate ought to do norms for the group members. So it ought to be the case that doesn't show in the group, but therefore the group members ought to do this and that. Okay. Okay. Number 18. I'm coming to the end, I suppose, with my time and also, but luckily also with my paper. A constitutive rule can be said conceptually and ontologically to transform, in the sense by definitionally and stipulationally transforming X in X counts as Y in C into a new institutional object or property or sometimes fact. I'm speaking of in Searlean, in terms of the Searlean X counts as Y formulation of constitutive rules here. So, for instance, it transforms Quillbelt into money. Thus, institutional activities, for instance, buying goods related to X, may become conceptually dependent on Y. Buying goods depends on money, the idea of money, really, conceptual dependency. As seen, a regulative rule, in contrast, regulates usually by telling people how to act, how to concretely act. For instance, in institutionalized traffic, to stop at red light. I think I used that example already. Never mind. Repetition is the and so on and so forth. Constitutive norms can be seen as higher order, both ontologically, by being in group contexts for the group and not directly for the individual members, and conceptually because of belonging to the institutionally created Y level, higher level. My central thesis in the above account of social institutions has been that the status and function of an institutional item, money, marriage, and so on, is conceptually and ontologically generated by collective acceptance. This serves to create the host group's institution, or at least its contained status functions. Now, I'll leave social institutions in a sense, and speak about social corporations and extended institutions a little bit. Few remarks at the end. A social corporation, in my sense, involves goals and an ethos, as well as collectively accepted constitutive and regulative rules, plus the employees' non-governed social practices for reaching their goals. The employees and other members accordingly have positional or role statuses, whatever you want to call them precisely. Corporate goals include providing reasonably priced, relevant social services for us, so to speak, the host group, if that's the us, or the we. A social corporation's employees are supposed to act so that both the ought to be and ought to do group level norms, together with their individual counterparts, will be obeyed, leading to the satisfaction of the ethos. So when all that happens, that I'm not going to question, that depends on how well the corporation functions, if things like this happen in actual life. The above suggests that the social corporation that is of the typical kind, by the people, for the people, functions as a social institution in an extended sense, which I also call the organization sense. The social corporation exists in a social community or state and generally involves normative organization with hierarchical role positions, thus statuses and powers for the individuals, as well as special constitutive and regulative norms. Such a social corporation, schools and hospitals, etc., is typically supposed to create one created by the host group, by us or whatever. The people, one can say that we are the people, and it has created it for itself, here us, the people, in this particular case. It can create them for some other collectives as well. Any real-life corporation is a collective and not merely a single legal person. That point I already made. And contains, for instance, shareholders, a board of directors, managers, and other employees. Okay, finally I summarize some. Well, first summarize some of the central features of the functions of social institutions. As I'm running a little bit late, so maybe I'll check if I need to say something, if there's something new here. This is only a summary of what I have already said, so maybe I can skip 22 and 23. If you quickly want to read them so that I check the letter. And 24. Oh, here is one point that I wish to emphasize and have written about in my 2013 book, the Social Ontology book. Functioning in the we mode in many cases leads to more rewarding results both collectively and individually than functioning individualistically. This is a tough point to argue for And we have many individualists in the audience, I guess, and I agree that it's a tough question. So the I mode, I call individualistic action I mode action. No, it's not we mode action, and I have argued for this in some detail in the social ontology book, and you may check there what you think of my arguments. So I'm saying it that in many cases we thinking and we mode thinking is good or better than I mode thinking in the case of social institutions. Not perhaps always, but in many cases, whatever that many means here, but there are lots of cases. That's what it means. Okay, final point, I guess, is that social corporations function as extended social institutions. This is actually one of the main theses in this paper of mine. So let me read a few final lines. Slide here. Extended social institutions are norm-governed social organizations with positions and position holders, plus the relevant status functions and deontic powers related to them. Extended institutions fall short of being corporations, but they are at least capable of action. They are not corporations in the full sense. Some features are missing. Okay. The following features of extended institutions or institutions in the organizations are summarized below 26. Briefly, a social institution in the extended sense, for example, public, university, school, army, hospital, is a social organization that provides services for some group in a way that may resemble normal governmental services, for instance, in the fields of education, security, and healthcare, but are still different. These services are typically non-profit or approximately so. The organization in question may have the form of a social corporation as characterized in this paper, and the following hypothesis can be conjectured in the spirit of our above discussion. Extended social institutions, that is, organizations that are institutions in the organization sense, the extended sense, that is, for instance, schools and hospitals in general, not in all parts of the world perhaps, but I'm speaking about especially the Nordic countries here. Those organizations can be incorporated so as to be able to function as social corporations in the sense of this presentation. Social institutions in the extended sense generally presuppose such basic institutions as money and private property. The institutional service is created and maintained by a group that is an extended communal or social institution's host group or host community are generally non-profit, or at least their economy is based on reasonably low fees that are used for the maintenance of services in question. That I have already said actually, so, but this is a summary in any case. So, maybe I can skip the following slide because I have already said those, discussed those entities that are claims presented there. Okay, finally recall that a social corporation has an ethos. The next slide, 29, yeah. Recall that a social corporation has an ethos containing its basic goals and presupposes basic social institutions. It also involves collectively accepted constitutive and regulative rules, said so many times over already, as well as the members' non-governed positional roles and social practices for achieving their positional goals. It may also involve shares and shareholders. The ethos of the social corporation includes at least its central goals and principles, which are supposed to provide reasonably priced social services for all of us, whereas the members collectively forming the host group. Whereas in Nordic countries that I know, the social corporations usually hold the biggest part of the shares. So that's to make things easier to handle and more difficult to conquer the social corporation, overtake, so to speak. Number 30. I think I have said those things in more or less, so I'll go to number 31 now.
How many minutes?
Yeah, what?
No minutes left. Can you wrap it up somehow?
I'll do it in 1 minute. Number 31. The above account gives evidence for the central claim of this talk that the social corporation, that in general is by the people, for the people, that's my slogan, functions as a social institution in an extended sense. In more general terms, a social corporation exists in a host community or state and involves a normative organization with hierarchical role positions, thus statuses and powers for the individuals. Such a social corporation is supposed to be one created by the host group as for itself, thus us. That's a normal case. Okay, so finally I want to thank my wife, Tuomela, standing here, for working me on this paper. And I also want to thank, another thank goes to the audiences in the University of, to the philosophers at the University of Vienna, where I gave this same talk or version of this paper earlier in this year, and also at the University of Munich, LMU. And I wish to thank the participants for excellent comments. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.